I'm going to be kind of in the dark a little bit, aren't I? Well, it'd be okay.
All right, I believe. Jess, did you see a notification pop up? Yeah, it says that we are now streaming live on Facebook. So we should see that pop up there in a second.
Okay, I'm gonna share this around.
Awesome, awesome. Yep, we are officially live. All right, good evening, everybody. This is Molly Maloney. I'm here tonight with Jessica Tansell and Thomas Freese, author, intuitive, storyteller, and you have many, you're a crafter. You do a lot of really exciting things. Tell us a little bit about, Jessica showing one of the amazing wands that you have made. And we're here tonight to talk about nature spirits, fairy folk, and trees. So tell us a little bit about you, a little bit about, wherever you feel compelled to start.
Well, first of all, thanks for having me on SoFire, and I live in Louisville, Kentucky, and I've been here since I came here for graduate school. I got my master's in art therapy, and I'm a professional storyteller. So fairy tales come in, that way. Besides true fairy tales, there's also the fanciful folklore that, kids love to hear. And as I tell stories, after I'm finished, the audience wants to share stories in whatever that same theme is. So if I told Civil War ghost stories, maybe they have a story of, encountering a Civil War ghost, or if I have fairy tales to share, some true fairy tales, then they want to stay afterwards and chat with me about that. So I've always been looking out for gathering more and more stories, and I've written 11 books, and I love to put people's true encounters and interview them, and the stories are all in their words. So I've written 11 books. 9 are collections of ghost stories, but not just ghosts, but also encounters with spirits and angels. And a certain percentage are the nature spirits. But it gets pretty interesting because sometimes people don't know what they saw or what they heard or what touched them. And so, was it a multidimensional entity? Was it an alien? There's just crazy stories. And I just put them all in my books. And I just let people tell stories in their own words. But I've had my own experiences, and I've traveled some as a storyteller, as an artist. I make really cool things out of wood. I make jewelry, wands, ornaments, spoons. And I got started making wands when I was in Alaska. I was in Anchorage, Alaska, to do a metaphysical event. And I hadn't made any wands, but I made little holiday ornaments. And some of them were like narrow tapers, spiral carved. And I was thinking, this is my rendition of a icicle. So 2 ladies walked up to my table. One of them picked up the wooden icicle and pointed at the other lady. And the other lady kind of gave a knowing nod. And then the first lady turned to me and said, "I've never met a wand maker." And I said, "Oh, that's not a wand. It's a wooden icicle." And I was going to continue talking about that, but she just emphatically said no. She said, "You're making wands. I can feel the energy." So there's just been a lot of serendipities that way in my life when I'm working at an event as an intuitive or an artist or a storyteller, and I'm just connect with people. So, and sometimes I take their ideas, like I started making wands, but as I made wands, I just thought, well, one wand is made out of pine, the other's made out of willow, the other's made out of oak. There's got to be different meanings for it. Like, there's different meanings for all different crystals and stones. So I started looking up online and I found some meanings, but the people at those websites, they didn't say where they got the information. And they said, well, we really, you can't really share this, or, you can't copy this information. So I endeavored to create a book, and that was, tree spirits and wood wisdom. And so I started working with some fellow psychics, and they gave me the meanings. They channeled the meanings. So I would send them pieces of wood with just numbers on them. And they didn't know woods anyway, like I know woods. I work with woods all the time. It was number 14 and number 20 and number 31. And so they just sat and they held the wood, and they got really fascinating information. So that kind of formed the basis for the book. and all the meanings for the woods. And then I created an index because the information they shared talks about, healing and protection and chakras. And so there's a wonderful index in there where you can look up. Maybe you have a friend that's diagnosed bipolar. Well, go look it up in the index. Or maybe someone's dealing with invasive spirits in their home. Well, look up psychic protection in the index. And then I also wanted to have people's stories of encounters with tree spirits or testimonials from their using my wand. So that went into the book too. So I'm always fascinated if people have stories about trees, whether it's even just a devotional story or that favorite tree they like to go to as a child. If you just take, for a moment to examine the wonderful companion that trees are, we love our crystals, we love our stones, but what are you most likely to have in your front yard? A crystal mine or a tree?
Right.
Well, of course, it's a tree. So we're instinctively drawn to trees, and we, as a child, we love on them and we hug them, and maybe we're upset, we're going to that tree and find some calmness. And people have amazing stories, even if you leave out the spirit part per se. They've got great stories of trees as companions. And of course, trees do so much for us, taking our carbon dioxide and giving us oxygen and all the practical things, from food and fruits, nuts, from lumber. Imagine a lot of musical instruments wouldn't exist without wood, without trees. And so there's just so much. And there's been wonderful books like The Secret Life of Trees. And it talks about, a lot of amazing things about how trees function, how they get nutrients through fungi. This is cooperative relationship down with the roots. So there's just a lot of stuff. But anyway, I started making a lot of wands in different shapes, and some are straight and some are spiral and some are serpentine. And I'll just give you one example of another synchronicity with trees. So about 5 or 6 homes away from me, there's a nice couple, and the lady does a lot of garden work. Her and her husband escaped from Vietnam from the communist takeover and the boat people. And her name's Chao, and she's really amazing. She knows all about plants. Well, her husband was outside there. I bicycled by on my route, and I looked over, and he had been digging up their persimmon tree by the roots, because I guess it died, and they wanted to plant something else there. So I stopped my bicycle, and I looked down, because we almost never get a chance to work with roots, because people are always cutting trees, right at ground level. So how often does a woodworker get to actually make a wand out of a root? So I looked down at that and I said, sir, what are you going to do with those roots? And he said, oh, we'll put them in the fire. Like, they're always burning things, And so I said, well, can I have some? And he said, well, take all you want. So I turned my bike around, went back home, got out the wheelbarrow and wheeled it over, a block and a half, and took all the persimmon roots. So I started making wands out of those. And when I worked events, I would have my wands laid out, say there's like 30 or 40 wands, and people would just like come straight over, point at the persimmon root one and say, that one, how much for that one? And so people have this instinctive reaction to trees and to even, just a piece of wood. Now, if you take a look at a piece of wood, you say, oh, it's just a scrap of wood, it's just a twig, it's just a maple seedling. But, just like a drop of our blood carries, the pattern of all of us, our DNA is in just one little part of us. You can take a hair sample and get the DNA, the whole pattern from someone. It's the same thing with just quote unquote a piece of wood. You basically have access to the whole energy of the whole tree and the lineage of that tree over space and time. So I think people recognize that, and then people have very visceral reaction to my wands. They'll walk up and they maybe like pick up one and then just like, oh my gosh, put it down, like not that one, or oh my gosh, I had like, I felt like tingling all the way down to my toes. And people have just amazing stories too of using my wand. So I'll tell you one wand story, and it's similar to this.
Okay. That's
So,
Beautiful.
oh, thanks. Thank you very much. So this is the whitest wood there is. And there's a lot of lore about this tree and this wood. And then, of course, to add, the energy of working it into, kind of a serpentine shape. And then, the Celtic interlaces. And then, sometimes I do runes or Ogam script. But anyway, I traded with a lady a wand very much like this, and she lives in Cincinnati area, and she cleans homes, but not like Mary Maids. She cleans out the mischievous spirits, when who you gonna call, not Ghostbusters. So she told me a story. She had this wand, and she was called to clear out an angry male spirit at a very old Victorian mansion. And this ghost had succeeded in getting rid of, each homeowner in turn. He managed to drive them away. So she was called. She brought all her candles and crystals and salt, and she brought all her bag of tricks, and nothing was working. And she can see ghosts. So she saw him standing there. He had a smirk on his face. She said she reached for her wand and pulled it out. His eyes got really big, and he backed up. And she said she just wrapped that sucker up, pointed that wand at him, wrapped up his energy, and sent him on his way.
Wow.
So cool.
Yeah,
So,
that's amazing.
Yeah, so I mean, I am learning. I'm learning myself by doing the book. I'm learning by getting testimonials from people. I'm learning. I didn't grow up in the the Wicca, the pagan tradition, so there's a lot I don't know. And so basically, when people email me a testimonial, I'm learning. I don't know. I can offer them the psychics suggestions for what the wood means, but it's just like crystals. You look at the list, it's like the new snake oil. There's 30 things that it's supposed to be good for, but then you have to decide. That one crystal, what does it really mean to me? And it's the same for trees and for woods. So one lady, I made her an Osage Orange wand, and I don't know if that grows around here. It's got the real bumpy. We call it a fruit, but only the deer maybe eat it. But it's kind of big, greenish yellow, and yeah, it's called Osage Orange. Now, Native American in the 1700s, a bow made out of Osage Orange was so valuable, an Indian would trade a horse and a blanket for a bow made out of Osage Orange. So the native people, they knew what, obviously the uses for all the different parts of the trees, and even the sacred uses beyond the practical, let alone, the pharmaceutical, the herbal. But anyway, this one lady I made an Osage Orange wand for, and I said, would you like to know the meaning? She said, okay, you can send it, but I'm going to get my own guidance, for how to use it. And then she messaged me later, and she said, I'm being guided to heal animals with this. Now, Osage Orange is very much known for earth healing. It very much connects to earth energy. So who knows if that was somehow a conduit for her working with animals and what she wanted to do. But I've got a lot of stories. Sometimes some of the woods I work with are lightning struck. So think about that energy, coming down from the heavens and, flashing, into every cell of the tree. And the native peoples knew all around the world, they reserved lightning struck wood for special uses. So in the Americas, the North American Indians, the Zuni, they only make their prayer sticks out of lightning struck ponderosa pine.
Oh, wow.
Now the Hopi Indians, I used to live out in New Mexico for 11 years, and the Hopi, they traditionally only make their kachina dowels out of cottonwood, but not any part of the Western cottonwood, only the root. So, you wonder how all these things get started, or if it's a practical concern, but there's so many fascinating stories about trees. Now, one interesting wood that I work with is called bog oak. I don't know if you've heard any stories about the bog, the ancient bogs, and they've discovered bodies. They're called the bog people. And so they're very well preserved, and same with the wood. So I work with oak that's from the Ukraine or other parts of Europe, and it's estimated roughly at 5,000 years old. Some samples test out at 8,000, and some maybe less than that. But think about, that oak tree was growing when Stonehenge was being built. And even sunlight was different back then. I mean, sunlight was different 50 or 100 years ago, but think about the energy of all the stars and the firmament and the sun and the moon. Just, it was different, 5,000, 10,000 years ago. So this oak wood has turned black, and I just love it. And people, once again, certain people are really drawn to certain wands and certain trees and certain woods. And I can have 50 wands laying out there, and they'll go straight for the bog oak and pick it up. And you can just see they're processing, they're feeling something. And one lady said, I feel like I'm sinking, and I thought, well, think about the bog,
Yeah, yeah.
yeah, the tree that like fell down in the bog and it was sinking and becoming
Wow.
altered, so there's just tons of stories about trees and tree spirits. In my book, I share a story from a local lady, Sybil Temple, and she's an amazing and gifted lady, but her daddy was a water witch. So the farmers would need to know, where do we dig a well? You can't afford to just like, dig 2 or 3 wells every 5 minutes and where's the water? I don't know, let's dig over here. So it's an expensive deal. And there were people that were gifted that would water witch, they'd take a dowsing rod and I've read different accounts in different parts of the Midwest or Appalachia. They'd have different favorite woods, but Sybil said her daddy preferred willow or peach. And he knew all the farmers in the area. He didn't charge a penny. And he preferred to go there to their farm and cut it. But if he knew that farmer didn't have any peach or willow, he'd cut it on his own property, and then he'd take that dowsing rod, of course, and they'd just start walking the land. And Sybil said that he could taste the water in his mouth, almost like psychically sensing, whether it was sweet water or oily or brackish or just bad water. And then of course dowsers, they can tell, how deep is the water, how wide is the channel, how does it flow, and they know all kinds of information. Sybil said that if they listened to him, they only dug once.
If they listened to him.
Right.
So
I love that story.
Yeah,
oh,
it's
it's
amazing.
I'll tell you one more story from Ted Andrews. He wrote Animal Speak and a number of other books. It's a gentleman that passed away, very gifted, and I got permission from Llewellyn to include his story in my book, Tree Spirits and Wood Wisdom. And I just love this story because I think for many children, their invisible friends were actually nature spirits. But, how would you know? And of course, I think in other cases, their invisible friends were ghosts, they were dead children or who knows what, and there's some stories from authors of UFO books that their invisible friends were actually, aliens. But here's Ted Andrews' story. He grew up in the 50s, and of course, back then, the TV and popular media was all about, Gunsmoke kind of stories and Westerns and everything. So he had there was a creek there and some woods, and he would go there and he built his he called it Fort Apache. And he, kids just like to go off by themselves and explore in nature. But he'd often see this girl there. She would kind of be like looking out from around a tree and giggling at him. And she always had a squirrel at her feet. And he would ask her, he said, she looked to be his age. He'd say, how come I don't see you in school? And she would just kind of laugh and skip on down the path. So, but one day he came out to the woods there and she was sad and mopey and sitting down at the creek, and the squirrel wasn't with her. And he tried to talk to her. Finally, she just kind of stood up, brightened up for a moment. She gave him a kiss on the cheek and said, I'll always remember you, Ted Andrews. And that's the last time he saw her. But he said 2 days later, the bulldozers came and cleared the woods.
Wow.
So years later, he just put it together that, she was a tree spirit. Now, I think we wouldn't say that she was a spirit of, like, for instance, the oak tree. But if you think of like the rock star, like Bruce Springfield, and he's got all the roadies around him and the tour manager and, ticket people. And, there's a lot of people that are attending to the rock star, to whoever the diva is, the performer. It's the same, like think about, the oak tree, but think about all the spirits, some small and some large, that are attending, to the tree spirit itself. So, so I would say that she was one of those attending spirits. So there's just so many beautiful stories. Now, when we wander, you might say from tree spirits to nature spirits, which is the part of the hour and the discussion that we have. There's a few things I thought about mentioning, that I kind of planned to talk about. And one is that just because something appears in nature doesn't mean it's a nature spirit.
Ah,
Right. So, there's a little bit of discernment there, and I don't know if anyone knows that. And also, nature spirits can appear inside your house. They can be in your bedroom, they can be in your bathroom. Just because it's a nature spirit, doesn't mean it's only out in the woods or your backyard.
Right.
So there's these kind of I don't know, these folkloric notions that we have in our brain and the way we're socialized, and the Disney movies we watched and everything. And I think there are Tinkerbells out there. I think there are the air spirits, but then there's other creatures, multidimensional entities that you can find in nature, but I really wouldn't call them the fairy folk. And I'll give one example. There's something called Kentucky Music Week in Bardstown, and I was attending that for a week, but staying with friends in Elizabethtown. Actually, they're out in the country there a little bit. And it was June, and there was a lot of those spring thunderstorms. And so while we were in their house, which is kind of long but kind of small, and the lightning was flashing, the thunderstorm was just ripping through there. There's some areas around here where it just seems like thunderstorms take a familiar path. And I think their area was one of those. So I kind of noticed with my third eye that there were these creatures out there, and their backyard was actually a field, I'll just say like 20 acres. And from the tree line, these creatures were moving closer to the house, but it's like a strobe effect. So there was a flash of lightning, and there was the creature, let's just say 200 yards away. And then with the next flash of lightning, it was 100 yards away. And with the next flash of lightning, it was 50 yards away. What do they look like? If you've ever seen The Dark Crystal with Jim Henson, the puppets, they were hulking. They were 2 or 3 stories tall. They did not look like Tinkerbell. They did not look like elves or gnomes. They were in nature, but I don't think they were nature spirits. I don't know what they were, but I said to Becky, the lady that lived there with her and her husband, I said, would you like to me to share with you what I'm seeing with my third eye? And she said, okay, yeah, go ahead. I told her, her eyes got really big, and she said, oh my gosh, I've been seeing those since I was a little child, and I was really, really scared of them until I just figured out that they're just curious. And I kind of got that same feeling that they were just moving in. They lived in some dimension that we're not regularly aware of. They weren't nature spirits like we think of, once again, the fairy folk or the elves or the gnomes. So more, creatures from another dimension, not human. And so since we're not necessarily socialized how to fuss out, all these different creatures that could appear, in our world, it's just instructive to talk about that. A child can have an invisible friend that's a ghost. A child could have an invisible friend that's a nature spirit. An adult could kind of have probably think it's in their imagination, like I did, and think that there's some monsters out there, and I need to go, get a little drink of whiskey and calm my nerves, if they're not experienced and balanced with, receiving psychic images and noticing things from the other dimension. But those things are there. And I think that's why as children, we were so fascinated with fairy tales because we were aware of monsters, So those creatures, I could see how someone would call them monsters,
Sure.
And I believe they only come in with storms. They only come in with storms. And of course, there's different folklore from different countries about storm creatures that only come in with storms. So, we can wander around here on this radar from tree spirits, nature spirits, multidimensionals. But I do have one last story to share before we get into a discussion or questions, and that is a lady in Louisiana. So this is like a classic, you might say, nature spirit, but it's interesting how it connects with technology. So I made an acquaintance through the internet with a lady who's had some experiences. She saw a samurai ghost when her husband was stationed in Japan and she lived there. He just walked through the living room. She saw a UFO taking off in Texas back in the 1960s. I think before the interstates were built. She was headed south of Austin, and she looked over and saw a flash of light, and there was a classic silver disc, flying saucer taking off. She had to look back to the road for a moment. When she looked again, she didn't see what she first saw. She saw a telephone pole with a utility worker, like with an arc welder flashing.
Mm-hmm.
And of course, if you're familiar with UFO literature, this is what's called screen memories. Kind of like Obi-Wan Kenobi saying, "You didn't see a spaceship."
Right.
Let me go into your mind. Let me rearrange things. And no, these are the images I want you to focus on. So she's what I call a psychic attractor. But here's the story that she shared with me. She ended up living in Louisiana. She was on her own then, and she had a dog that she would walk at sunset. And you can imagine, the pretty oak trees there, the live oak with the Spanish moss hanging down, and the atmosphere of Louisiana. But the dog was always fascinated with this one tree. And at the base of the tree, there were these cloven hoof prints. And it would go sniff, 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 sniff. And it was really fast. It was like something's there. And over the months, she noticed, kind of like in the crotch of like two big branches there, the trunk coming together, there was like a light. And she'd see this light. And each time, and then the light started taking form. And she started seeing like a pan figure, with like the goat bottom and the cloven feet, and then more human, kind of human-like, but very earthy. And but then over the weeks and months, it disappeared. Like it slowly faded away. When it was totally gone, they finished installing the nearby cell phone tower.
Mm-hmm.
And then a weird thing happened. The figure started slowly coming back again, and then she realized over time that the cell phone tower, which I guess this doesn't usually happen, had been taken down and relocated somewhere else.
Oh, wow.
So,
Interesting.
you can think about it in terms of technology, but you can also look at it in terms of like competing magic.
Right.
Oh,
Right. Yeah.
Yeah. Wow.
Yeah.
What an interesting way to look at that.
Mm-hmm. That's fascinating. And for anybody that's joining us, just keep in mind, as always, if you have questions for Thomas as we go along, please feel free and add those in the comments. We, of course, will always be looking to take your questions. And I
do have plenty more stories. So but feel free to jump in if I can attend to any questions or comments.
Awesome. We're excited. I know that you've been making some new things too also, which is really great. And I know we've got a few questions for you, but I know at the end we'll have you share where people can find your items, because that is a question that's popping up already. So Molly, where do you want to start?
Let's see. I am a little discombobulated over on this end. So if you've got your questions, why don't you kick us off?
Perfect. All right. Well, I've been watching your new items you've been making, and I know that you work with spirit or with your psychic senses in many ways. But one, I'd love to hear about where the inspiration between the women, the fertility goddess type stuff that you've been making came from, and also like your connection with spirit and how that comes into play in your work.
Okay, thanks. Those are good questions. It's so funny that you ask. Just recently, I've been working with, I don't know, just call them like primitive goddess figures. Mm-hmm. And I can do some things that are very complex, with the Celtic interlaces, but sometimes I go more simpler. Like I've made versions of like Zuni fetishes, where it's just like a simple bear and it's really stylized, or a lizard. And I did that going back to the 1980s when I lived in New Mexico. And, it was almost environmental there, so, as I walked the paths that the Anasazi, the ancient ones, walked, and, as I looked around and saw the walking rain, coming down across the desert landscape, and as I crunched down, on obsidian arrowheads and volcanic rock and pottery shards that were 1,000 years old. I mean, it's just like, as you're an artist and a spirit inspired person, it's just like, it's like you have to work with those things that are there in your environment. So I started working with Native American designs, and this was in the 1980s, and I basically would replicate like Zuni fetishes, coyote and different animals, and would go from figures to, someone said, well, just cut it in half and you got earrings. Like, oh yeah, duh, and so I started making them, pins and earrings, and of course bolo ties, people wear out there. And but I think more important was just communing with nature out in New Mexico, because everywhere on this planet, you've got nature. Even if you're in a high rise in Manhattan, you're still on planet Earth. You're still in nature. You can still talk to the nature spirits, even if you're on the inside of a ship. We can telepathically connect with or commune with nature spirits, even if we're not out in the garden. And so, there's that false dichotomy of what's inside us and what's outside of us. We've got the whole universe inside of us, or you might say there's really no any and outy, it's all one. But there's a lot of people think, I saw that nature spirit, and that nature spirit's separate from me and it's out there. But, we're all connected. So there's a lady that communicates with Bigfoot. And some people maybe, kind of almost put Bigfoot, in the realm of nature spirits, because they're out in nature and they're connected to the land. Obviously, they're not like, Tinkerbell kind of situation, but the Bigfoot is really interesting. And I had a Sasquatch kind of telepathically kind of show up. Well, not telepathically. I had a Bigfoot like come through my bedroom wall.
Ah, wow, yeah.
But they're interdimensional, so that's not a problem. They move around that way. And I live alone, so I'm very aware if someone's in the house. Unfortunately, it's always been a spirit, a visitor or intruder, and not, a physical one. And I went bolt upright, looked over, and he looked like a Wookiee. And he just kind of looked at me like, oh, my bad, and then he disappeared. So, and the reason I mention some of these things is when I was in New Mexico, I could feel the spirits. I may not always see them. And so I think that's always happening for me. And sometimes I just really don't think about it, process it consciously. I just get that wood. However I got it, it was the persimmon root from the neighbor, or someone says, I've got some wood for you, or a tree that fell down or hit by lightning, or even just online. I was like, I found out about bog oak online. I'm like, oh my God, I've got to get that. And ordered it. It took 3 weeks. I'm tapping, on, online and making arrangements with Victor in the Ukraine. And he says, don't worry, Tatiana will pack it. It will be okay. It will get there. So, just wherever I can get, and just intuitively, I'm drawn to those woods. And I'll figure out the reasons later, just like you got to buy that crystal. You got to, get that crystal. You got to get it. And later you read up on it. Oh, what was it? It's right. Libyan desert glass, and and there was a meteorite, and all that cognitive stuff can come in later. But I think the first movement is instinctive. We just recognize that's mine. That's I want to get to know that. Like you want to get to know a person, I want to get to know that tree or that wood. So when I'm drawn to a wood, I'll just get it, and I'll just, what does it want to be? Does it want to be a wand or a piece of jewelry, or maybe some of both over time? And so this is lightning struck pecan, and it's just somebody I work with occasionally. And he said, oh yeah, it's struck by lightning numerous times. It's this ancient pecan tree. And I'd never worked with pecan, I've worked with probably 100 different woods, and there's always woods I still haven't worked with. And so, I got to get some, bring, next time we meet. He works for the VA, and I was a visiting teaching artist. And so next time I was working with the veterans there, doing an art project, he brought some of the wood. So I think a lot of it is just intuitive. I just get that wood. Then, for instance, I started working with the goddess designs you mentioned. And, what's good, sometimes I look online for inspiration. I think Einstein said the secret to creativity is knowing how to hide your sources. So, I can get inspired, I'm not ripping people off, but, let's just see what's out there that might be convenient. And a lot of that's floating around in the ideosphere anyway, and we're always borrowing from each other. But yeah, the funny thing is, just yesterday I got a message from a very good astrologer, Jan Carter. She used to live here in Louisville, and she's up in the Chicago area. And she started talking about, she said, I see your goddesses you've been making, the goddess pendants. She says, do you know that you have Ceres, the asteroid, Ceres, and it's right on your blah, blah, blah. Then she started talking about astrology stuff. And I'm like, okay, whatever. But, like that's like the goddess is really prominent in my natal chart and also with what's happening right now. So I don't even know these things. It's just like, okay, today or this week or this month, I'm going to do some goddesses. And then, another time it's going to be, I'm going to do the moon phases, or another time it's going to be, I'm going to work with the runes, and I could be channeling, a past life. I could be inspired by something I saw in a movie, or a museum, I guess it's not conscious in the regular way, like a very planned out thing. It's just very instinctive. And in fact, when I'm sanding my wood pieces, out on my back porch, I'm happy to have no brain functioning. Like I'm just, that's the beauty of art therapy is an hour, 2 hours go by. Did you think about anything? Nope.
Right. Yeah. It becomes a very meditative process.
Oh man. And it felt good. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. That's awesome. That's awesome. Let's see. Questions here. So wait. Oh, go ahead.
No, I was going to say I have our list if we need it of our questions.
And I have some more stories too, whenever.
Well, we were definitely hoping to get a good ghost story out of you at some point, maybe towards the end of this. So.
Okay, sure.
Yeah, that was absolutely on our list too.
As far as your mediumship, can you tell us like how because I've not the way I've worked with you is I've seen wands, we've done class with Barbara on Tuesdays together, but I haven't worked with you intuitively. So I know you do intuitive readings, so I'd love to hear more of your process with that. Do you do a lot more of that, or do you feel like your woodwork is your main work? Like you do a little bit of everything. So.
Oh, thank you. Thanks for the comment. Yeah, it just varies. So my Catholic mom gave me my first set of tarot cards back in the 70s. It's like everyone around me knew that I was going to do this before I gave myself permission to do it. And I actually started working the psychic fairs, not as a reader, I was a vendor. And there were some psychic fairs in the area, Kentucky, Tennessee, called the New Earth Festivals. And this was back in the 1990s, right? And Tom Barish. And so I would set up my woodcrafts there, but I'm checking out all these people. I'm like, this is my tribe, I like these people. And at the same time, I had been doing a lot of reading. I had gotten, was working with the cards just for myself for like a decade. And then I got some books about palm reading. So I was just like, learning. And people would walk up to my booth and I would say, can I see your hands? Because I just want to compare like what's really there compared to what's in the book. And, but like I said, the other psychics that walk up to me and say funny things. Like one guy, he's dressed all in black. His kind of stage name was Orion down in Tennessee, really good psychic. And he like walked up, planted himself right in front of my booth before we got started for the day. And he said, you'd make a lot more money as a reader than as a vendor. And then I was out in Owensboro with, what's that lady's name? Southern Illinois, and she's done some shows, Evansville and everything. But anyway, I did some of her Pegasus creations or something. I did some of her shows. So I was there as a vendor, and then kind of bored, went over and sat down at one of the psychics, kind of stereotypical middle-aged female, sitting there and just chatting with her. And she starts flipping the cards, and then she's getting images in her brain. And I said, oh, I starving artist, I can't, afford a reading or whatever. She goes, don't worry about it. So, but she's getting images, and she says, I'm seeing a faucet and the water's going drip, 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 and then it's flowing. I said, oh, I'm going to have plumbing problems. She goes, no, that's channeling. You're going to be doing what I'm doing. It's going to start off drip, 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 and then it's flowing. So Tom Barish, who did those psychic fairs, I was living in Lexington, and it was like 1997. And he came up to me and he said, I see you've been looking at people's palms. I said, well, I'm not, taking any money. I didn't want to get into trouble. I'm just trying to learn. He goes, no, you don't understand. Our next fair is in Lexington and we don't have a palm reader. So
Yeah.
after about 6 months or so of doing just palm reading, I'd already been doing a decade of doing the cards for myself. I just started doing the cards, and then, I'm working and it just learning a lot since the 90s, and this other stuff started coming in, just like past life stuff. So after a certain number of years, I just made it another, a la carte menu, option if palm, tarot, and past lives. And then I started noticing, like if I'm talking about someone like, oh, I'm getting like a grandfather figure, and I start talking like someone just pops in and they say, well, here, they get, back in the old days it'd be a photograph, in your wallet. Of course, now it'd be like a phone. But when people started showing me photographs, it was like a Harry Potter photographs. I just started getting all this information. So now I just say, I can do readings from pictures, and I can do that in person or remotely. Someone just could message or email me or text message, and the person can be alive or deceased. It doesn't matter. But I've got fascinating stories, obviously, as you can imagine, from doing so many different readings for so many people. I'll just tell you one quick about past life. I was up working Victory of Light back in the 90s, and the gentleman was maybe in his 40s, and I was doing a past life reading for him. And he just stopped me for a second. He said, you can continue, and he pointed at his 3 adult children. I said, he said, I'm paying now. You're going to read for my 3 children as well. And then I'm going to tell you something about what you just told me. So I finished. I had told him that he was in Napoleon's army, but it wasn't really low down like a private, wasn't really high up like a general. He was in between, and that was the problem, because the generals were having him send the men under him into suicidal charges. And I said, it really tore you up. That's when his eyes got big. He was in Desert Storm with the United States military. He said the same situation came in. And, of course, that's what's happened. Like a circle or a spiral, we'll come back to that same lesson. If we master it, it becomes not a circle, but a spiral, and you rise above it. So he said, he went to the generals. He said, I don't care if you're going to court-martial me. Here's what we're going to do to protect my men. So he mastered that. I just hear amazing stories from people when I do past life readings. And I just tell people, your past lives are here now. When someone sits in front of me, if I'm given permission, or if it just kind of can't help it, pops in a little bit, it's like, I phase shift, I see them, but I see someone else. I think a lot of people have had hundreds of past lives. So whoever my helpers are, the spirits, the angels, they will select, let's say like within a 15-minute mini reading, they'll select, an average of 3 past lives, but it'll have specific connection to the issues of what's going on now in their life. So it's not just like, oh, like I'm bored and I'm looking at the cereal box sampler. But no, this is like information that's important for where you're at now. I remember I did a lavender festival. I had my little table set up in Ohio at the Lavender Festival. A lady sat down. I didn't know her from Adam. And even now, sometimes if something weird pops in, I'm reluctant to say it, even after working like this for over 2 decades. And I saw an old-fashioned roller skate in my mind's eye. And I thought to myself, I can't, tell her that. And I told her, I don't know if I can tell you. And she's like, here she is, the client, give me permission, go ahead. So I told her, I'm seeing an old-fashioned roller skate. And she laughed for 5 minutes. She knew who it was and what it meant. Well, she knew who it was. It was her dad. He owned a roller skating rink.
Oh, wow.
I said, wait a minute, there's always a double meaning to the communication. So I tuned in for a second, and I said, he's saying, stop going around in circles like you would in a roller rink. Take your skates and go out the front door and go do what, go where you want to go. She says, that's exactly what's going on and exactly what I need to hear. So it's just a fascinating journey, how people have encouraged me along the way, how, different scales have expanded, just like other careers. We have professional development. And any way that you choose to do that, whether you're a mentor, that someone's helping you, or you're just kind of finding your own path. But so I do what I call remote readings. That you don't have to be in front of me. You can just email me or text message a question, or I'll just tune in. There's one lady I've been doing a lot of readings for here a lady, her first name is Beth, and she's in J-Town, and she channels herself, and she'll go like so far with her research and with her own channeling, and then she's like, oh, I got to get a reading from Thomas. And because I've done it so much for her, I can remote view past lives for her, just like go to it immediately. And it's like watching the movies. I'm really excited whenever I do a remote reading for Beth. And one time I saw her as, you might say, as an Atlantean refugee. She was taking, she was a heathen and going through the mountains of Tibet. And she was taking a power object. And this is a sensitive topic because some of these power objects shouldn't get into certain people's hands. They're still available now, or they still could be located. And my guides were very specific as to, you know, what I channeled for her, where we were going to stop that line of information. But I saw her as a man and as a former, you might say, a military and leader. She, Beth, as a he, was going and taking these power objects to trusted places and trusted people on the planet, knowing that Atlantis was still going to have a more violent breakup geophysically. I saw her in the French Revolution, and she had an uncle that was very much interested in her spiritually, and I got information that he was not born of woman, that he came to the planet a different way. So, you know, it's just amazing. Whenever I do my readings, I just never know what'll come through. It's just, I feel very honored to do that work.
That's amazing. So, I mean, you've obviously had a really long and winding journey as you've been developing your gifts. And we have a lot of developing mediums that tune in every Wednesday. So what would you say is, you know, whether it came from, you know, other intuitives or it came from spirit, what was one of the most useful pieces of guidance that you've received along your journey?
What I'd like to share is a quick little story to answer your question. And it illustrates how we never know in our life experience that leads us to wanting to earnestly serve others through channeling, through psychic work, mediumship, whatever you want to call it. Different people had different names for it throughout the ages. I was a Shaker singer for 10 years at the old Shaker village, and they called their psychic instruments. So whatever word you want to use, channeler, instrument. In the Christian format, it's called personal revelation. You know, so people kind of will frame it or use different terms. But I think this story will illustrate how what they have already experienced has prepared them for this moment. Okay, when I was a teenager, so I grew up in a small Catholic family of 8, and that's my parents and 6 kids. So we really had to wait a number of years, 6, till you got a really nice Christmas present. And I really, really wanted a telescope. So finally, I think it was like 1969, I waited and finally got the telescope. And then I was outside at night and looking at, oh my gosh, the universe, and learning about stars and clusters and nebula and meteor showers. And so I was like a nerd, I got another telescope. I was doing astrophotography. I went and studied at McDonald Planetarium before I was even in high school. At the planetarium once, the instructor said, we're going to turn on perfect viewing. Now, most people can't find constellations in perfect viewing because there's too many stars. It's not like in the city, like there's the main stars. So even the instructor, when he put on perfect viewing, he was lost. I said, excuse me, sir, can I use your laser pointer there for a moment? So I was like Jesus in the temple, at 12 years old, I was showing all the students and the instructor, I just knew it like the back of my hand. Well, when I got my first psychic reading in 1979, the lady said to me, Earth is not your natural habitat. She said, there's another you. You're operating 2 physical vehicles, two people, but one's Tom here on Earth and the other is one of the aliens, the Space Brothers. And so that's why you're not always here all the time. You're visiting your own self and astrally projecting over there. And I've got a lot of stories that will back up what she said. But that's why the stars were so easy for me. But here's what I'm getting around to. Family of 8, I was taking a break. I'd go out at 12 in the morning. In the 1960s, at midnight, 2 in the morning, it was actually really quiet. So what was I really learning to do? I didn't know it at the time till 30 years later, sitting out there, perfectly quiet, alone with the universe, 14 years old, I was learning to meditate. But I didn't know it at the time, but it developed my sensitivity. Imagine, many nights being out there, no interference, no problems from other people, no cares, no worries, just you and the stars. And so that, we put money in the bank for when we need it, like this year, with the coronavirus and the pandemic, it's like, oh yeah, we're going to have to hit the savings. But we also put experiences in the bank. And I think the people that are coming to learn and wanting to serve, they already have experiences that make them uniquely able to springboard with their gifts. So I didn't know it at the time. It was 30 years before, but when it came around, it was a natural for me to listen and to that still small voice. So I would suggest that the folks who are asking that question and are curious, that just look in their own history. Maybe they were through some trauma, a family trauma or abuse, or maybe they were in the military and saw terrible things, or all those things, like the motto of Chiron and the wounded healer, all those things they can use to open up their psychic self, connect with their unique version of the way they can serve others by channeling.
Yeah, absolutely. Beautiful.
So we're getting real close on time. We don't have a lot of questions, but I thought,
oh goodness,
Molly had such a great idea earlier. She was like, we should ask Thomas to tell a ghost story. And I thought that was a brilliant idea, Molly. So Thomas.
Yeah, we can't have a storyteller on without a little,
Turn down the lights a little bit.
Yeah, I got my lights down. I've had them down.
Yeah.
Oh, yes. And you've made this tree, correct?
Yes.
It's beautiful. Yeah.
This is one of my tree sculptures.
Oh, that's gorgeous. And for everybody that's watching and wondering, we will definitely put information up on how to get in touch with Thomas and see all the amazing things that he makes and has to offer.
Thank you. So I've only written 9 books of ghost stories. And I love telling ghost stories, as you can imagine. And I actually can tell some ghost stories bilingual, Spanish and English. I lived 16 years in Hispanic cities and studied Spanish down in Mexico. And for instance, I like to tell La Cuenta de la Llorona, the story about the woman, crying or weeping woman. And of course, my family background is Celtic, is Irish and German, and we have the crying woman too in the Irish lore. We have the banshee, and the banshee is a family ghost. Ban, the banshee, Ban is the hill. She is the woman. She's the woman of the hill. So the Irish believed that the fairy forts, were where the others lived. And so the banshee was the woman of the hill, or banshee. And so, but even in Mesoamerica, they had this story going back to the Aztec and Cortez and the conquest by the Spanish of a woman who went through the night before the Spaniards took over and killed so many people. There was a woman who walked through the streets, llorando, crying and crying, mis hijos, mis hijos. Of course, that's Spanish, and it would have been, the Indian language, but the Aztec. But the Hispanics have amazing stories of shape-shifting, owls, tecolotes, and brujas and witches. So there's so many different cultures that talk about ghosts and spirits. Let's see, what are my glasses? How much time do I have for a ghost story?
Oh, we're fine. Yeah, I'm gonna turn it.
Okay. So let's see, what would be a good ghost story to tell? Not all ghosts are people. And some people have stories of a ghost cat or a ghost dog. And I was telling animal ghost stories to some 5th graders, and a boy came up afterwards. He says, Mr. Freese, I sure like your animal ghost stories. He said, I had a hamster and it died, but at night that wheel. And I was telling animal ghost stories in Garrett County in Lancaster, Kentucky. And a 7th grade girl came up and she said, Mr. Freese, you were telling animal ghost stories. She says, I keep horses. One of them died, but I still see it. Of course, I'm not surprised by anything I hear. And she says, oh, no, you don't understand. I still have to give it feed and water, and I can watch the feed and water go down.
Oh, wow.
Wow.
So, but I think maybe a Civil War ghost story would be a good one. So this is from my book, Haunted Battlefields of the South. There's a woman named Dorothy Kress who lived in Cross Plains, Tennessee. She went to Stones River, but that's not the name the Southerners call it. And even now, after 150 years, they have different names for the same battle and battleground. The Southerners call it, Confederates call the Battle of Murfreesboro, but the Northerners call it the Battle of Stones River. Dorothy has family from both sides, from both the North and the South. And when they would go to family reunions there, the Northerners would come down and they would talk about walking through the Confederate areas and feel like they're walking through cobwebs, like there's a resistance. But when her family from the South walked through the Confederate area, they didn't feel any resistance. And conversely, the family from the South, when they walked through what was the Union encampment, that's their experience. They felt like cobwebs, and vice versa from the family from the North walking amongst their fellow Northerners. But Dorothy went one time to Stones River. I want to tell you this story with her son, who was 19 years old. And of course, 19 years old, young adults, they know everything.
Right.
Absolutely.
Mark Twain.
I know I did.
Yeah, Mark Twain was away from his dad for a while, and he was on adventures and out in gold country and learning all kinds of things. He came back and he says, I was amazed how much my dad had gained in wisdom during that time. Well, of course, Dorothy had been telling, she was a psychic attractor. She'd see ghosts all the time. She grew up Mormon in Utah and seen pioneer ghosts go through her bedroom. She saw 9/11 happen before it happened. She saw Resurrection Mary when they lived in Chicago. If there was a ghost in the neighborhood, Dorothy was going to see it. So she would see visions. And so after 19 years, her son didn't believe any of this. He said, Mom, that's a bunch of bunk. In storytelling, this is what's called the setup. So they're walking Stones River, the battlefield where all those men died. Psychic trauma embedded in psychic imprints in the land and the very air itself. And he starts going like this.
Mm-hmm.
Now it was November and it was cold. And she looks at him and said, what are you doing? He says, these flies are buzzing around my face. She looked at him and says, those aren't flies, those are bullets going past your head. No, Mom, I don't believe any of that. It's flies. Of course, there were no flies. It was cold. It was November.
Mm-hmm.
Then they hear the sound of a cannon. He's trying to look over the brow of the hill and says, Mom, where are the reenactors today? She just shakes her head and says, son, we're here by ourselves. There's no reenactors. This is what happens when you walk the battlefield. Then things got interesting. They heard the sound of men wheeling around, cavalry. They could hear the command, charges, volleys of rifle fire going off, screams, captains shouting out instructions. They could feel the vibration of the earth, of the wheeled movement of cannons and the wheels setting around and the smoke. They could smell that sulfurous smoke of the battle. And they could hear sounds of men marching past, scraping their canteens, scraping past trees that no longer existed. Oh, and then things got interesting. They watched as two soldiers came out from opposite woods over a green open space. One was an older Union soldier dressed in blue. Opposite was a young Confederate dressed in butternut. The older man pointed his rifle at the younger Confederate and said, son, put down your rifle. The young man pointed his rifle and said, Dad, you put down yours. This went back and forth. The father shot his own son. They both watched as he ran over to attend to his dead and dying son, and he was shot and fell next to him. And then the vision disappeared. Now, this was not unusual for Dorothy, but by then, her son was starting to form a slightly different opinion about ghosts. and going to a Civil War battlefield. But what Dorothy said was, we're going to go report this right now at the visitor center. And I'll tell you what, they're just going to laugh at us. So they did. They marched right over. It was a lady ranger, you know, and the son agreed with everything that he had seen, that Dorothy had also seen. And she laughed, but not because she didn't believe them. She said, you wouldn't believe how many people have reported seeing that same scene.
Wow.
Wow.
That's amazing.
Now, people say, why, Mr. Freese, why would after 150 years these poor souls not gone onto the light? When they cross over, there's no space and time. They're still in 1862. And so they're still reenacting the battle. And I believe the reason they're still active is to remind us that we still have potential for deep division in our society. And they know the price that was paid, and they're not going to go until they're reassured that we can work together again and not fall into the same trap that they went through.
Wow.
That is incredible.
Yeah, it really, really is. That's amazing. That's a great story.
Thank you.
That is a great story.
Well,
I certainly know where Murfreesboro is. Well, thank you so much, Thomas, for being here with us tonight. This has been wonderful. And obviously, we could keep this conversation going on and on. So that just means we'll just have to have you back.
We would love to have you back.
Oh, anytime, anytime. There's a lot of topics I could talk about, a lot of stories to tell, and be happy to share anytime that might work out.
Awesome. Awesome.
And I don't have a intuitive or psychic website, and my regular website is way, way out of date, but you know, people could find me on Facebook. And then I don't know if you'll talk about, you know, any donations or whatever, but
yeah, absolutely. If you want to mention your donation link, and then of course we'll post that in the in with the video as well in the feed.
Okay. Well, if it's PayPal, if that would work, it's my email, info at Thomas, adding my middle initial L and Freese.com. So info at thomaslfreese.com, ThomasLFreese.com.
Perfect.
And we'll be sure to post that in the comments also.
Okay,
so so that the love donations come your way, and also they can message you for information about your amazing wands.
Wands, yes. Yes,
yes.
All of your other amazing work.
Thank you so much. Well, if they friend me on Facebook, or if they're already friends, they can look for, I post a lot of the cool stuff that I make on Facebook. And yeah, anytime y'all want me back, I got lots of stories.
Yay.
Awesome.
Cool.
Well,
okay.
Thank you so much. And thanks everybody for joining us here this evening. Tomorrow night, of course, we have got Christopher Paul, Christopher Paul Hancock. Did I say his name correctly? My brain just went completely gone. He will be here tomorrow night for Astro Lab. We've got Kat and Jess back on Saturday night starting at 8 o'clock with music. Just Kat?
Just Kat. I'm in Journey this weekend.
Oh, that's right. That's right. So it will be Just Kat on Saturday at 8 o'clock with live music. Have a great evening, and we will see you next week. Thank you, everybody.
Bye, you guys.
And